The boy had been living alone in the mountains for 8 months when Catherine found him. His parents, off-grid survivalists who'd never registered his birth, had died in a flash flood, leaving their 10-year-old son completely alone with no identification, no records, no proof he even existed. He'd survived through remarkable ingenuity, but he was slowly starving, slowly failing. Catherine Wells was dying of cancer, had come to her grandfather's mountain cabin to spend her final months in peace. The last thing she needed was responsibility for a child. But when the boy showed her his experiments, crude attempts to purify water, to preserve food, to understand why things worked the way they did, Catherine recognized something extraordinary. This child, with no formal education beyond what his survivalist parents had taught him, was conducting scientific inquiry, asking questions, testing hypotheses, learning through observation. He had the mind of a natural scientist trapped in circumstances that would waste it. Catherine made a decision. She would spend her remaining time teaching him everything she knew. Physics, chemistry, biology, mathematics, a lifetime of knowledge compressed into whatever months she had left. She would die, but her understanding would live on in this brilliant child no one knew existed. Dr. Catherine Wells received her death sentence on a Tuesday in late September. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, metastasized to her liver and lungs. Prognosis: 6 to 9 months with aggressive treatment, perhaps 3 to 4 without. "We can start chemotherapy immediately," her oncologist said with practiced sympathy. "It won't cure the cancer, but it might buy you additional time. Quality of life will be impacted, of course. Nausea, fatigue, immune suppression. But many patients feel the trade-off is worth it." Catherine, 62 years old and a physicist who'd spent her career studying the fundamental nature of reality, asked a simple question: how much time? Realistically, with treatment, possibly a year. Without treatment, perhaps 6 months. Catherine did the mathematics. 6 months of relatively functional existence versus a year of being sick from both cancer and chemotherapy. The choice was obvious. "I decline treatment," she said. "I'll make arrangements for hospice care when the time comes." Her colleagues at the university were shocked. Her few remaining friends argued that she should fight, should try every option, should not give up. But Catherine had never been one for false hope or denial. The cancer was terminal. Treatment would only delay the inevitable while making her miserable. She preferred to spend her remaining time conscious and capable for as long as possible. She took medical leave from the university, put her affairs in order with methodical precision, and made one final decision. She would spend her last months at her grandfather's cabin in the Cascade Mountains, the cabin where she'd spent childhood summers, where her grandfather, himself a scientist, an astronomer, had first taught her to love understanding the natural world. The cabin was remote, requiring a 4-mile hike from the nearest road, perfect for someone who wanted to die somewhere beautiful, far from hospitals and pity and the suffocating atmosphere of waiting for death. Catherine arrived in early October, as autumn turned the forest into a riot of gold and red. The cabin was exactly as she remembered, small, rustic, but structurally sound. Her grandfather had maintained it meticulously until his death 5 years ago, and Catherine had ensured it remained in good condition even though she rarely visited. She settled in, establishing routines that would sustain her through whatever time remained. Mornings for reading. She'd brought boxes of books, both scientific texts and the classic literature she'd never had time for during her working life. Afternoons for walking as far as her deteriorating body allowed. Evenings for sitting on the porch, watching stars emerge, thinking about the universe and her infinitesimally small place in it. The boy appeared on her 4th day there. Catherine heard noises near the supply shed where she stored food and equipment. Animal, she assumed. Bears were common in these mountains, and a poorly secured shed was an invitation to scavengers. But when she investigated, she found not a bear, but a human child. He was perhaps 10 years old, rail-thin, filthy, wearing clothes that were little more than rags. He'd jimmied open the shed's lock with impressive skill and was methodically selecting items: jerky, dried fruit, matches, with the focused efficiency of someone who knew exactly what he needed. "Hello," Catherine said calmly, not wanting to startle him into running. The boy spun around, eyes wide with fear and something else, calculation, assessing whether to flee or talk. "I'm not going to hurt you," Catherine continued, "but I would like to know why you're stealing my supplies." The boy's chin lifted defiantly. "I'm not stealing, I'm borrowing. I was going to leave payment." He held up a small carved figure, a remarkably detailed bird, clearly made by someone with skill and patience. "That's beautiful work," Catherine acknowledged. "Did you make it?" A nod. "What's your name?" Hesitation. Then Leo. "I'm Catherine. Would you like to come inside, Leo? I have food I'm willing to share, and you look like you could use a meal." Leo studied her with those calculating eyes, clearly weighing the risks of trusting a stranger against the obvious benefits of freely offered food. Hunger won. He followed her into the cabin, maintaining careful distance, positioned near the door for quick escape if needed. Catherine prepared a simple meal, soup, bread, fruit, and watched in dismay as Leo devoured it with the desperate efficiency of someone who'd been hungry for a long time. When he finally slowed, she asked gently, "How long have you been living out here alone?" 8 months, since the flood. The flood? Leo's expression shuddered. Flash flood in June. Came down the mountain fast. Mama and Papa were at the river. They couldn't. He stopped, unable or unwilling to continue. "I'm sorry," Catherine said quietly. "That must have been terrible." A shrug, affecting indifference that didn't reach his eyes. "They taught me to survive. I've been doing okay, but you're alone. Surely there are authorities who should be notified, relatives who could take you in." "No authorities," Leo said sharply. "No relatives. Mama and Papa didn't believe in government. We lived off-grid. They never registered me with anyone. Far as the government knows, I don't exist, and I want to keep it that way." Catherine felt the implications settling around her like a weight. This child had no birth certificate, no social security number, no medical records. He'd been born and raised completely outside the system. When his parents died, no one had reported him missing because officially he'd never existed. "Leo, you can't live alone in the wilderness indefinitely. You're 10 years old. You need education, medical care, social development." "I'm fine," Leo interrupted stubbornly. "I can hunt, trap, find water, make fire. I know which plants are edible. I've been managing for 8 months, but winter is coming. What happens when the snow is 6 feet deep? When game becomes scarce and foraging impossible?" Leo had no answer to that, his silence acknowledging the problem he'd been trying not to think about. Catherine made a decision that was probably foolish and possibly illegal. "Stay here, with me, at least through the winter. I have supplies, space, and—" She hesitated, then continued. "I have knowledge. I can teach you things your parents couldn't. Science, mathematics, how the natural world actually works. When spring comes, we can figure out what happens next." "Why would you help me?" Leo asked suspiciously. "Because I'm dying," Catherine replied bluntly. "Cancer. I have perhaps 6 months. I came here to die alone." But she looked at this feral, brilliant child. "Maybe I was wrong about wanting to die alone. Maybe teaching you would be a better use of my remaining time than sitting on a porch feeling sorry for myself." Leo studied her with those 2 old eyes, seeing the truth in her jaundiced skin, her careful movements. "You're really dying? Really dying? Then yes, teach me. I want to learn everything. Before you die. Before the knowledge dies with you." Over the following days, Catherine learned Leo's story in fragments. His parents, Rachel and Thomas, had been extreme survivalists, not violent anti-government types, but people who genuinely believed modern civilization was corrupt and unsustainable. They'd moved to these mountains before Leo was born, built a small cabin miles from Catherine's, and raised their son completely off-grid. They'd taught Leo wilderness survival, basic literacy, and math, but their education had been limited by their own knowledge and ideological blind spots. They'd believed in natural learning, that children would develop necessary skills through experience rather than formal instruction, but they'd underestimated how vulnerable their isolated lifestyle made them. When the flash flood came, a freak weather event, water surging down a normally dry ravine, they'd been caught at the river's edge gathering water. Leo, back at their cabin, had watched the water rise and his parents disappear. By the time he reached the river, there was nothing to find. He'd buried them as best he could, marked the graves with cairns, and then survived alone for 8 months. Through summer and into autumn, subsisting on skills his parents had taught him and sheer stubborn determination not to die. "Why didn't you seek help?" Catherine asked. "Surely you knew there were towns, people who could assist. Mama and Papa said the government would take me away, put me in foster care. They told me stories about kids in the system, abuse, neglect, moving from home to home. They said the only safe place was with them, off-grid, free." Leo looked down. "But they died, and I didn't know what to do, so I just stayed, survived, like they taught me." Catherine felt anger at Leo's parents, well-meaning perhaps, but ultimately selfish people who'd prioritized their ideological purity over their son's welfare. But anger served no purpose. The parents were dead, Leo was alive, and Catherine had limited time to help him. "Show me your experiments," she said. "You mentioned you've been conducting experiments." Leo's face lit up, the first genuine smile Catherine had seen. He led her to the ruins of his family's cabin, partially destroyed by the flood, but still containing remnants of their life. There, in a small clearing, Leo had set up a series of crude but ingenious attempts at scientific inquiry. There were different methods of water purification, boiling, filtering through charcoal and sand, leaving it in the sun in clear bottles, each method labeled with scratches on wood, noting observations about clarity and taste. There were experiments in food preservation, smoking, salting, drying in the sun. Again, careful notes about which methods worked best for which foods. There were attempts at understanding combustion, different types of wood burned at different rates and temperatures, observations about moisture content and efficiency. "This is remarkable," Catherine said genuinely. "You've been conducting actual scientific method, hypothesis, experimentation, observation, conclusion. Did your parents teach you this approach?" "Not exactly," Leo replied. "They taught me to survive, but I wanted to understand why things worked, why some wood burns faster, why water flows downhill but evaporates uphill to clouds, why the moon changes shape." They said I asked too many questions. Catherine felt her heart break and soar simultaneously. Here was a natural scientist, someone with the fundamental curiosity and methodical approach that made real inquiry possible, a mind that could have thrived in proper educational settings, but instead had been isolated in wilderness, with parents who, however loving, couldn't nurture his intellectual gifts. "I'm going to teach you," Catherine said firmly, "properly. Physics, chemistry, biology, mathematics. I'm going to give you 40 years of scientific knowledge compressed into whatever months I have left. It won't be easy. Science requires discipline, rigor, the ability to be wrong and keep trying. Are you willing to work hard?" "I've been surviving alone for 8 months," Leo replied. "I can do hard things." They started immediately. Catherine had brought books, both her own research materials and basic texts she'd thought she might reread during her final months. Now those books became Leo's curriculum. Mathematics first. Leo could count and do basic arithmetic, but his understanding was purely practical. Division for splitting resources, multiplication for estimating supplies. Catherine taught him that mathematics was a language for describing reality itself, that numbers could explain everything from planetary orbits to the behavior of atoms. Leo absorbed it with hungry intensity, working through problems late into the night by lamplight, asking questions that revealed both his gaps in knowledge and his intuitive understanding of underlying concepts. "Why do we need negative numbers?" he asked during one lesson. "You can't have negative deer or negative water." "True," Catherine replied, "but you can have debt, owing someone more than you possess. And in physics, negative numbers describe direction and opposition. Temperature below zero, movement backward versus forward. Mathematics describes not just counting physical objects but relationships and concepts." Physics came next, starting with mechanics, the study of motion and force. Catherine used the natural world around them as laboratory. They studied falling leaves to understand gravity and air resistance. They analyzed the creek's flow to understand fluid dynamics. They examined the cabin's structural integrity to understand stress and load distribution. Leo proved to have exceptional spatial reasoning and intuitive grasp of physical principles. When Catherine explained Newton's laws of motion, Leo immediately connected them to observations he'd made while hunting, how arrows arced, how thrown rocks traveled, how his own body moved through space. "Everything's connected," Leo said with wonder. "It's not separate facts, it's one system. The same rules that make rocks fall make planets orbit. The same forces that move water move air. It's all the same." "Yes," Catherine confirmed, feeling the deep satisfaction of seeing someone understand not just facts but the underlying unity of physical reality. That's what makes physics beautiful. The universe operates on consistent principles. Once you understand the principles, you can explain anything. Chemistry was more challenging. Catherine had no laboratory equipment, no way to conduct proper experiments, but she taught Leo the fundamentals: atomic structure, chemical bonding, reactions, and equilibrium. They used cooking as practical chemistry, understanding how heat changed molecular structures, how salt preserved food by creating osmotic imbalance, how yeast fermentation produced bread and alcohol. "Everything is atoms," Leo said, processing this revelation. "You, me, the trees, the water, the air, all made of the same basic building blocks, just arranged differently." "Exactly. And those arrangements determine properties. Carbon atoms arranged one way make soft graphite. Arranged differently, they make hard diamond. Same element, different structure, completely different material." Biology fascinated Leo because it connected to his survival experience. Understanding how plants photosynthesized explained why some grew better in sun versus shade. Understanding animal behavior and physiology made him a better hunter. Understanding ecology explained why the forest existed as an interconnected system rather than isolated organisms. "Life is chemistry that's learned to reproduce itself," Catherine explained. "We're all chemical reactions, incredibly complex ones, but fundamentally just atoms interacting according to physical laws. The miracle isn't that life exists, but that these chemical reactions became self-sustaining, self-replicating, capable of evolution and consciousness." Leo spent hours examining the forest through this new lens, seeing not just resources to exploit for survival, but a vast interconnected system of organisms, each filling ecological niches, each adapted through millions of years of evolution. "It's so much more than I thought," he told Catherine one evening. "I thought I understood the forest because I could survive in it, but I didn't understand anything. I knew how to use it. Now I'm starting to understand what it actually is." As autumn turned to winter, Catherine's health deteriorated noticeably. The jaundice deepened, her appetite vanished, pain became constant, managed imperfectly by medications she'd brought with her. Some days she could barely leave bed, but she continued teaching, driven by the knowledge that her time was finite and Leo's potential was too valuable to waste. On good days, they worked through advanced concepts, quantum mechanics, relativity, the fundamental forces that governed reality. Catherine didn't expect Leo to fully grasp these ideas. They challenged professional physicists, but she wanted to plant seeds, to show him how deep knowledge could go. On bad days, when Catherine was too weak for formal lessons, Leo would read to her from her books, asking questions that showed his growing understanding. Or he would share his own observations, experiments he'd conducted, patterns he'd noticed, connections he'd made between different areas of study. "You're a scientist," Catherine told him during one of these conversations, "not because of degrees or publications, but because of how you think. You observe, question, test, revise. That's the essence of scientific method. Everything else is just formalization." "But I'll never be a real scientist," Leo said sadly. "I don't exist. No birth certificate, no school records, no way to go to university or get a job. When you die, I'll just be alone again, surviving in the mountains with knowledge I can't use for anything." This was the problem Catherine had been avoiding. What would happen to Leo after she died? He couldn't remain in the wilderness indefinitely, but entering civilization meant bureaucratic complications. How do you integrate someone who doesn't legally exist? "I've been thinking about that," Catherine admitted. Yuki Tanaka, who runs an educational nonprofit for gifted students from non-traditional backgrounds. "I've reached out to her, explained your situation in general terms. She's willing to help, to work through the legal complexities of establishing your identity, to provide educational opportunities once you're documented." "You want me to leave the mountains?" Leo said flatly. "I want you to have opportunities that match your abilities," Catherine corrected. "Leo, you're brilliant. You've learned in months what takes most students years. You have the potential to contribute to human knowledge, to solve problems, to understand mysteries no one's unraveled yet. But you can't do that alone in the wilderness. Knowledge requires community, other people to share ideas with, to challenge your thinking, to build on your work. Mama and Papa said civilization was corrupt, that living off-grid was more honest. Your parents were wrong," Catherine said bluntly. "Not about everything. There are legitimate criticisms of modern society. But isolating yourself from human community isn't purity. It's just another form of poverty. Science requires collaboration, sharing, building on accumulated knowledge. No individual can advance understanding alone." Leo struggled with this. Loyalty to his parents' ideology, warring with his growing understanding that isolation had severe limitations. The resolution came from an unexpected direction. Leo's own curiosity finally outgrew what the mountains could provide. "I want to see stars through a telescope," he told Catherine one December evening. "You've taught me about galaxies, about how the universe expands, about light traveling billions of years to reach us. But I've only seen it with my eyes. I want to see what telescopes show. I want to see the detail, the evidence for everything you've taught me." "Then you'll need to leave these mountains," Catherine said gently. "Visit observatories, use instruments I could never provide here. Learn from other scientists who've spent careers studying specific questions. Will Dr. Tanaka really help? Make me legal? Give me chances to learn more? She will. I promise you that." Yuki's dedicated her life to finding brilliant minds in unexpected places and giving them opportunities. She's helped students from poverty, from refugee situations, from places the traditional education system overlooks. "She'll help you, but I don't want you to die," Leo said, his voice cracking. "You're teaching me everything. I'm not ready for you to go." Catherine felt tears she'd been holding back for months finally fall. "I'm not ready either, but cancer doesn't care about readiness. All we can do is make the most of whatever time remains." Winter deepened. Snow fell heavily, isolating them completely. Catherine grew weaker, spending more time in bed, her lessons shorter and less frequent. Leo took over most practical tasks, maintaining the fire, preparing food, managing supplies, but the teaching continued. On days when Catherine could barely speak, she would gesture to books, and Leo would read aloud, pausing to discuss what he was learning. On better days, they would have long conversations about science, philosophy, the nature of understanding itself. "Why does knowledge matter?" Leo asked during one of these discussions. "If we all die eventually, if the universe will eventually end in heat death, Why does understanding anything matter? Because consciousness is the universe's way of understanding itself, Catherine replied. We're the part of reality that can observe and comprehend the rest. That's remarkable. Maybe it doesn't matter in some cosmic sense, but it matters to me, to you, to everyone who's ever looked at the stars and wondered. Understanding is its own reward. In January, Catherine's condition worsened dramatically. She could no longer leave bed. Pain became excruciating despite maximum medication. She was dying, clearly and rapidly. Dr. Tanaka arrived in early February, hiking through heavy snow with 2 companions, following the GPS coordinates Catherine had provided. She was a woman in her 50s, Japanese-American, with the calm competence of someone who'd faced many difficult situations. Dr. Wells, she said gently, sitting beside Catherine's bed. I'm Yuki Tanaka. We've corresponded. I'm here to help Leo. Catherine, barely conscious, managed a weak smile. He's brilliant. Please don't let him be wasted. I won't. I promise. Catherine died 3 days later, on a clear, cold morning with Leo holding her hand. Her last words were, keep asking questions, keep seeking understanding. That's how you honor what I've taught you. Dr. Tanaka handled the aftermath with professional efficiency. She contacted authorities, provided documentation of Catherine's terminal illness and death, handled the legal complexities of the situation. Leo, meanwhile, was numb with grief. He'd lost his parents, then spent 8 months alone, then found Catherine and gained 6 months of purpose and connection, only to lose her too. It seemed unbearably cruel, but Yuki didn't give him time to collapse. Dr. Wells spent her final months teaching you, she said firmly. She died believing you would continue learning, would do something meaningful with the knowledge she gave you. Are you going to prove her right or prove her wrong? Right, Leo said quietly. I'll prove her right. The legal process of establishing Leo's identity took 6 months. DNA testing, interviews, social workers evaluating his situation. Eventually, they created documentation, birth certificate, social security number, school records that acknowledged his unconventional education. Yuki enrolled Leo in her nonprofit's program, designed specifically for intellectually gifted students from non-traditional backgrounds. He struggled initially with social interactions. 10 years of isolation hadn't prepared him for peer relationships, but academically, he soared. Teachers were astounded by his grasp of advanced concepts, his ability to connect disparate areas of knowledge, his natural scientific intuition. By age 12, Leo was doing high school level work. By 14, college level. By 16, he was conducting original research. He specialized in ecology and environmental physics, fitting, given his background. His research combined rigorous scientific method with intuitive understanding of natural systems, informed by years of actually living in wilderness. At 18, Leo published his first peer-reviewed paper on climate change impacts on mountain ecosystems. The author bio simply stated, Leo Wells was educated in non-traditional settings before entering formal academic study at age 10. He chose Wells as his last name, honoring Catherine, the woman who'd given him not just knowledge but the understanding that knowledge mattered, that learning was itself a form of purpose. At 25, Dr. Leo Wells returned to the Cascade Mountains where he'd grown up, where he'd survived alone, where Catherine had spent her final months teaching him. The cabin still stood, maintained by the foundation Yuki had established in Catherine's name. Leo had brought equipment, proper scientific instruments, computers, communication systems. He was conducting field research on mountain ecosystem resilience, work that combined his wilderness expertise with sophisticated scientific training. But he also came to remember, to honor, to complete the circle. On Catherine's grave, marked with a simple stone near where his parents were buried, Leo placed a copy of his doctoral dissertation, The Integration of Observational and Empirical Methods in Ecosystem Analysis. She would have been proud of the work, he thought. Proud that he'd continued learning, continued asking questions, continued seeking understanding. You saved me, he said to the stone. Not just physically, by giving me food and shelter during that first winter, but intellectually. You showed me that my curiosity wasn't annoying or pointless, it was valuable. That asking why was the most important thing I could do. That knowledge was worth pursuing for its own sake. He paused, collecting his thoughts. I've taught dozens of students now, through Dr. Tanaka's program. Students from backgrounds like mine, people the system overlooked, who didn't fit traditional educational paths. I try to do for them what you did for me, show them that their minds matter, that understanding is achievable, that knowledge is its own form of freedom. Leo stayed at the cabin for 3 months, conducting research during the days, reading Catherine's books at night. He'd inherited her personal library, decades of accumulated scientific texts, annotated with her thoughts and observations. Reading them felt like continuing a conversation with someone he'd only known briefly, but who'd changed everything. On his last night before returning to civilization, Leo sat on the cabin's porch, watching stars emerge. He thought about Catherine's words,
Consciousness is the universe's way of understanding itself. She'd been right. Every question he asked, every mystery he unraveled, every student he taught, it was all part of that grand project of understanding. Catherine had died, but her knowledge lived on in him, and through him it would spread to others. Knowledge didn't die with individuals. It accumulated, built, grew across generations. That was the point. That was what made learning matter. Not immortality. Catherine was gone, would eventually be forgotten beyond a few research citations, but continuity. Each generation learning from the last, adding to the sum of human understanding, passing it forward to the next. Leo Wells, who'd been born into isolation and raised in wilderness, who'd lost his parents and survived alone, who'd spent 6 months being taught by a dying physicist, had become part of that chain, a link between past and future, between knowledge and application, between the woman who'd given everything to teach him and the students he would teach in turn. The stars watched silently, as they had for billions of years, as they would for billions more. The universe, vast and indifferent, continued its expansion. But in one tiny corner, on one small planet, a young man sat thinking about questions and answers, about teachers and students, about the extraordinary gift of understanding. And somewhere, in whatever way consciousness persists beyond death, if it persists at all, Catherine Wells smiled.